You know what the problem with galactic intelligence networks is? They're about as reliable as a chocolate teapot in a supernova. Case in point, the Zerithian Collective's latest briefing on Sol 3, which apparently described humans as a primitive species showing promising signs of technological development and suitable for standard pacification protocols. Admiral Vexthara of the Zerithian Third Fleet stared at this report, with the kind of expression usually reserved for finding out your favorite restaurant has been serving you reconstituted protein paste for the last decade. His second-in-command, Captain Krill Knox, hovered nearby with that particular brand of nervous energy that suggested he'd rather be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. "So let me get this straight," Vexthara said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd just realized he might have made a career-ending mistake. "Command wants us to—" "What exactly? Roll up to this backwater planet and demand their surrender?" That's the essence of it, sir," Krillnox replied, fidgeting with his datapad. Standard intimidation display, followed by occupation protocols if they refuse to comply. Now here's where things get interesting. The Zerithian Collective had built their entire military doctrine around the concept of overwhelming force against technologically inferior species. It had worked beautifully for about 3 centuries, give or take a few genocides. They'd roll up to a planet, flex their superior firepower, and most civilizations would fold faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The thing is, their intelligence-gathering methods had one tiny, insignificant flaw. They relied entirely on passive observation from the outer edges of solar systems. You know, the kind of surveillance that might pick up radio waves and energy signatures, but completely miss the nuanced details of a species' actual capabilities. It's a bit like trying to understand human civilization by watching TV commercials from orbit. Sure, you might conclude that humans are obsessed with laundry detergent and car insurance, but you'd probably miss the part where they split atoms for fun and built machines that can calculate the exact trajectory needed to land on moving celestial bodies. Admiral Vexthara, to his credit, had always been the cautious type. It's what had kept him alive through 17 different campaigns across the Andromeda sector. But even he couldn't have predicted what was about to unfold when his fleet dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the Sol system. "Sir," his communications officer called out, antennae twitching with what could charitably be described as barely contained panic. "We're receiving multiple signals from the third planet." "Multiple?" Vexthara's eye stalk swiveled toward the officer. "Define multiple." "Approximately, The officer's carapace had gone slightly pale. 14,000 distinct transmission sources, sir, and they're all broadcasting simultaneously. Now, for context, most civilizations the Zerithians had encountered might have a few dozen communication satellites. Maybe 100 if they were feeling particularly ambitious. 14,000 suggested either a civilization with an unhealthy obsession with redundancy, or something else entirely. "What kind of transmissions?" the Admiral asked, though he was starting to get that sinking feeling that usually preceded very bad news. "Entertainment broadcasts, commercial advertisements, news networks, educational programming, and—" The officer paused, mandibles clicking in confusion. "Something called social media influencer content that appears to be consuming roughly 30% of their total bandwidth." Vexthara exchanged glances with Captain Krillnox. In their experience, civilizations capable of wasting 30% of their communication capacity on frivolous content were either incredibly advanced or incredibly stupid. Sometimes both. "Pull up their energy signatures," the Admiral ordered. What appeared on the main display would have been impressive if it weren't so utterly terrifying. The third planet, Earth, according to their database, was lit up like a festival celebration. Cities sprawled across entire continents, connected by networks of transportation systems that pulsed with constant activity. But more concerning were the thousands of artificial objects orbiting the planet. "Those can't all be communication satellites," Krillnox muttered. "No," Vexthara replied grimly. "Some of them appear to be weapons platforms." "Sir?" The communications officer spoke up again. "We're being hailed." "By who?" "Everyone, sir. We're receiving contact requests from approximately 200 different organizations, 17 governments, 43 news networks, and something called NASA that seems particularly excited about our arrival." This was not going according to plan. In Vexthara's considerable experience, primitive civilizations usually responded to the arrival of alien fleets with either terror or awe. They didn't typically throw what appeared to be an impromptu welcome party. "Put the NASA on screen," he ordered. The main display flickered, and suddenly they were looking at a middle-aged human male wearing what appeared to be a casual shirt and sitting in front of a wall covered with images of spacecraft. The human was grinning with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for small children discovering ice cream. "Holy shit, are you guys actually aliens?" the human said without preamble.
This is fantastic!
"I'm Dr. Richards from NASA. That's the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and we've been hoping someone would show up eventually. Do you have faster-than-light travel? What's your propulsion system like? Are those plasma weapons or some kind of particle beam setup?" Admiral Vexthara stared at the screen. In 3 centuries of military service, he'd never encountered a species that responded to the arrival of an armed fleet by asking technical questions about the weapons pointed at them. We are the Zerithian Collective," he began, falling back on the standard intimidation script. "You will prepare for immediate—" "Oh wow, Zerithians!" Dr. Richards interrupted, apparently consulting something off-screen. "That's fascinating. We've been tracking your hyperspace signatures for the last 6 months. Really elegant jump technology, by the way. We're still working on our own FTL systems, but we've got some promising theoretical frameworks based on—" "You've been tracking us?" Vexthara's voice climbed several octaves. "Well, yeah. I mean, hyperspace jumps create pretty distinctive gravitational wave patterns. We've got detection arrays scattered throughout the outer system. Actually, we were wondering when someone would finally show up to make contact. We've been sending out signals for decades." Captain Krillnox leaned over to whisper in the Admiral's ear. "Sir, if they can detect hyperspace signatures, that suggests—" "I know what it suggests," Vexthara hissed back. "The thing about technological development is that it rarely progresses evenly. A species might master interstellar communication while still using primitive projectile weapons. Or they might develop incredible computing power while remaining stuck on their home planet. What the Zerithians were slowly realizing was that humanity had taken a somewhat unique approach to advancement. Dr. Richards," the Admiral tried again, "we are here to discuss your planet's surrender to the Zerithian Collective." Dr. Richards blinked. Then he started laughing. It wasn't the terrified laughter of someone facing inevitable doom. It wasn't even the maniacal laughter of someone who'd finally snapped under pressure. It was the genuinely amused laughter of someone who'd just heard a particularly good joke. "I'm sorry," Dr. Richards said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Did you just ask us to surrender? That's... Oh boy, you guys really don't know much about humans, do you?" Chapter 2. First Contact Protocols, or lack thereof. Now here's where things get really interesting. While Admiral Vexthara was having what could charitably be described as an existential crisis on the bridge of his flagship, the rest of Earth was responding to the arrival of alien visitors with the kind of barely controlled chaos that would make a quantum physicist weep with joy. Within minutes of the Zerithian fleet's arrival, every major news network on the planet had interrupted regular programming. Social media was exploding with amateur footage of the alien ships. Apparently half the planet owned devices capable of detecting objects in space, which was its own kind of terrifying. And somewhere in Geneva, a room full of diplomats was having a heated argument about whether first contact protocols should include wine service. But the really interesting part was happening in approximately 47 different military command centers around the globe. General Harrison Webb sat in the Pentagon's Strategic Command Center, watching the live feed from NASA with the expression of someone who'd just been told that his weekend fishing trip had been canceled due to an alien invasion. Around him, dozens of officers were scrambling to coordinate what appeared to be the most complicated defensive scenario in human history. "Sir," Colonel Martinez called out from her station, "we've got confirmation that the alien fleet consists of approximately 60 vessels, ranging from what appear to be frigates to something that's about the size of Manhattan." "Weapons status?" Webb asked. "All systems are green, sir. We've got satellite-based defense platforms, ground-based installations, and our submarine fleets are moving into position. Plus the experimental systems are standing by." "Ah yes, the experimental systems." This is where the story gets really fun, because while the Zerithians had been busy cataloging Earth's radio transmissions and energy signatures, they'd somehow missed a few rather important details about human technological development. See, humans have this peculiar trait where they tend to turn everything into a weapon. Peaceful nuclear technology? Obviously, we need nuclear missiles too. Space exploration? Better figure out how to defend our satellites. Scientific research? Let's see if we can weaponize it. Over the past 50 years, while the galaxy's various civilizations had been casually ignoring Earth as a primitive backwater, humanity had been busy building what could generously be described as the most paranoid defensive network in known space. "Colonel," General Webb said calmly, "get me a connection to our friends upstairs." Meanwhile, in low Earth orbit aboard the International Defense Station, which most civilians still thought was just a research facility, Commander Alex Turner was having the time of his life. The IDS was humanity's little secret, a joint project between 12 different nations that had spent the last 20 years perfecting some truly creative approaches to planetary defense. "Turner here," he said into his comm unit, while simultaneously coordinating with stations around the globe. "We've got visual confirmation on the alien fleet. They're maintaining position at approximately 1 AU, which suggests they're either being cautious or they're waiting for something." "What's your assessment, Commander?" came General Webb's voice. "Well, sir, they're definitely packing some serious firepower. But here's the interesting part. Their formation suggests they're expecting either immediate surrender or token resistance. Classic intimidation setup." Turner pulled up a tactical display showing the Zorithian fleet's arrangement. Any military strategist would recognize it immediately. A formation designed to look overwhelming while actually being vulnerable to coordinated attack from multiple vectors. "Sir," Turner continued, "I think they might have seriously underestimated us." Back on the Zorithian flagship, Admiral Vex Thara was coming to the same conclusion, but from the opposite direction. His conversation with Dr. Richards had been educational. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Vex Thara said slowly. "You've detected our arrival, you're not afraid of us, and you've been expecting contact with alien civilizations?" "Oh, absolutely," Dr. Richards replied cheerfully. "We've got entire departments dedicated to xenobiology, exosociology, and first contact protocols. Actually, we were starting to wonder if maybe we were alone in the galaxy." "This is really exciting." "And your government's position on our demands?" Dr. Richards shrugged. "Well, I'm not a diplomat, but I'm pretty sure the answer's going to be thanks but no thanks. We're kind of fond of our independence. Plus, we've got this whole democratic thing going on, which makes surrender votes logistically complicated." Captain Krillnox had been quietly running scans of the Earth system while this conversation continued, and what he'd found was giving him the kind of headache usually associated with advanced mathematics or trying to understand human humor. "Sir," he whispered urgently to the Admiral, "you need to see this." The tactical display showed the Sol system in unprecedented detail, and what it revealed was that humanity had been very, very busy. There were defense platforms scattered throughout the asteroid belt, monitoring stations on Mars and several of the outer moons, a network of early warning satellites that extended well beyond Pluto, and on Earth itself, energy signatures that suggested weapon systems that shouldn't exist for a species that hadn't even achieved faster-than-light travel. "How is this possible?" Vex Thara muttered. "Sir," his science officer called out, "I'm detecting some unusual readings from their planetary surface." "What kind of readings?" "Well, they appear to have multiple facilities capable of producing antimatter, in significant quantities." The bridge went dead silent. Antimatter production was typically a technology developed by species that had been spacefaring for at least 500 years. It required incredibly sophisticated containment systems and energy sources that most civilizations didn't master until they'd colonized multiple star systems. "That's not possible," Krillnox said flatly. "Sir," the science officer continued, "I'm also detecting what appear to be... Oh no." "What?" "Artificial gravity generators. They're using them for some kind of propulsion system." Now, here's the thing about technological development. Sometimes a species gets really, really good at one particular thing while ignoring everything else. Humans, it seemed, had become absolutely obsessed with finding new and creative ways to blow things up, while simultaneously developing the technology needed to survive increasingly exotic forms of destruction. They'd skipped right past the colonize nearby planets phase and jumped straight to the prepare for interstellar warfare phase. It was like watching a species develop nuclear weapons before they'd invented the wheel. "Admiral," Dr. Richards said from the screen, apparently noticing that the conversation had stalled. "Are you guys okay? You look a little pale. Well, paler than usual. I don't really know what color you're supposed to be." Vex Thara slowly turned back to the human. "Dr. Richards, what exactly is your planet's military capability?" "Oh boy, that's a complicated question. I mean, I'm not military, so I couldn't give you specific details even if I was allowed to. But let's just say we've been preparing for this possibility for a while." "This possibility?" "You know, hostile alien contact. We've run scenarios." "Lots of scenarios. Actually, our military guys get kind of excited about theoretical alien invasion plans. It's like a really complex strategy game for them." Admiral Vex Thara was beginning to understand why no one in the galaxy attacked Earth. It wasn't because it was defended by some vast interstellar alliance or protected by ancient treaties. It was because every species that had bothered to take a close look had apparently decided that tangling with humanity was more trouble than it was worth. Unfortunately, he was only just figuring this out while sitting at the head of a fleet that had come here specifically to tangle with humanity. "Dr. Richards," he said carefully, "hypothetically speaking, If a hostile force were to threaten your planet, what would be your response? Dr. Richards considered this question with the thoughtful expression of someone trying to explain quantum mechanics to a particularly bright golden retriever. Well, hypothetically speaking, I'd say that would be a really bad idea for the hostile force. We've got this whole extinction event thing figured out. Been through several of them already. Asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, ice ages. We're pretty good at surviving stuff that kills most other species. He paused, then added almost as an afterthought. Plus, we've been preparing for space combat since before we actually got to space. Turns out most of the principles are the same whether you're fighting in atmosphere or in vacuum. Chapter 3. The Strategic Assessment. While Admiral Vexthara was having his slow-motion realization that perhaps the Zerithian collective had made a slight miscalculation, the rest of his fleet was conducting their own assessments of Earth's defensive capabilities. What they found was causing a mild panic among the junior officers, and what could generously be described as career-ending anxiety among the senior staff. Lieutenant Commander Zixtal, the fleet's tactical analyst, had been running continuous scans of Earth's orbital infrastructure for the past 2 hours. His findings were comprehensive. Sir, he reported to Captain Krill Knox, I've completed the preliminary assessment of their defensive network. And? Well, sir, the good news is that they only have about 3,000 orbital platforms. Krill Knox's antennae perked up slightly. 3,000 platforms was manageable, depending on their capabilities. The bad news, Zixtal continued, is that approximately 800 of those platforms appear to be armed with some form of kinetic weapons. 400 have what look like directed energy systems, and the remaining 1,700 are broadcasting active sensor data that suggests they're part of an integrated targeting network. That's actually more concerning than I was hoping for, Krill Knox admitted. It gets worse, sir. They've got installations throughout their solar system that appear to be mining and refining operations. Automated facilities on asteroids, processing stations on their outer planets' moons, and something on Mars that's generating enough energy to power a small city. The thing about humans, as the Zerithians were discovering, is that they have a tendency to approach problems with what could charitably be called overkill. When humanity had finally confirmed that yes, there were other intelligent species in the galaxy, and yes, some of them might be hostile, they'd responded with the kind of comprehensive preparation usually associated with doomsday preppers or people who really don't like surprises. Over the past 30 years, while most of Earth's population was going about their daily lives, a significant portion of the planet's industrial capacity had been quietly redirected toward defensive preparations. Not the obvious kind. Nobody was building giant laser cannons in downtown Los Angeles. But the less obvious kind. The kind that turned asteroid mining operations into potential weapons platforms, and space-based solar collectors into potential directed energy systems. What about their ground-based capabilities? Krill Knox asked. Zixtal consulted his datapad with the expression of someone reading their own obituary. That's where it gets really complicated, sir. They appear to have weaponized their entire industrial infrastructure. Explain. Well, those facilities I mentioned that are producing antimatter, they're not military installations. They're research facilities attached to universities. Their power generation systems aren't just generating power. They're generating exotic matter that could theoretically be used for gravitational manipulation. And those transportation networks that span their continents? Some of them appear to be capable of accelerating objects to significant fractions of light speed. Now here's where the story gets really interesting. What Lieutenant Commander Zixtal had stumbled across was humanity's approach to the concept of dual-use technology. Why build separate military and civilian infrastructure when you can design systems that serve both purposes? Those university research facilities producing antimatter, also capable of manufacturing the fuel for humanity's most exotic weapons systems. The global transportation network? Also a planet-spanning mass driver system, capable of launching projectiles into orbit at velocities that would make relativistic physicists weep with joy. The power grid? Also a distributed energy weapons network. The communication satellites? Also sensor arrays and targeting systems. Even the civilian space program was doing double duty. Those research missions to the outer planets had established monitoring stations and supply caches that could support military operations throughout the solar system. Back on Earth, in a nondescript building in Colorado, Dr. Elena Vasquez was coordinating what was probably the most complex defensive operation in human history, while simultaneously trying to explain to a room full of military officers why their carefully planned response scenarios might need some last-minute modifications. "Gentlemen, ladies," she said, addressing the assembled commanders via secure video link. We're dealing with what appears to be a standard intimidation fleet. 60 vessels arranged in a classic shock and awe formation. They're expecting either immediate surrender or token resistance followed by rapid capitulation. General Webb leaned forward in his chair. What's your recommendation, Doctor? Well, sir, that depends on our objectives. Are we looking to send a message to the galaxy at large, or just convince these particular aliens that Earth isn't worth the trouble? Explain the difference. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a tactical display that showed the Zerithian fleet's position relative to Earth's defensive network. Option 1. We demonstrate just enough capability to convince them to leave. Clean, simple, minimal escalation. The display shifted, highlighting potential attack vectors and defensive countermeasures. Option 2. We demonstrate enough capability to convince everyone else in the galaxy that attacking Earth is a supremely bad idea. And the difference in practical terms? Option 1. We disable a few of their ships and let them retreat. Option 2. We disable most of their fleet and send the survivors home with a very clear message about Earth's defensive capabilities. General Webb considered this while watching the live feed from NASA where Dr. Richards was still enthusiastically discussing spacecraft design principles with an increasingly bewildered Admiral Vexthara. Dr. Vasquez, in your professional opinion, what happens if we choose option 1? In the short term, this particular threat goes away. In the long term, every aggressive species in the galaxy assumes Earth is an easy target, and we get to do this again. A lot. And option 2? In the short term, we potentially start an interstellar war. In the long term, everyone in the galaxy knows that attacking Earth is a good way to lose most of your fleet. This was the fundamental problem with first contact scenarios. There was no manual for this situation. Humanity had spent decades preparing for hostile alien contact. But most of the planning had focused on survival, not on the complex diplomatic implications of demonstrating military capability to a galactic community they'd never actually met. What's the current status of our defensive systems? Webb asked. Colonel Martinez checked her displays. All orbital platforms are active and tracking the alien fleet. Ground-based installations are powered up and standing by. Our submarine fleets are in position for coordinated strikes, and the experimental systems are ready for deployment if needed. The experimental systems was military shorthand for humanity's collection of weapons that technically shouldn't exist yet. Things like gravity manipulation devices that could create artificial black holes, quantum entanglement communication systems that allowed instantaneous coordination across impossible distances, and a few items that were classified at levels so high that most of the people operating them weren't entirely sure how they worked. The thing is, humans have this peculiar relationship with theoretical physics. Most species discover faster than light travel first, then work backward to figure out the underlying principles. Humanity had done it the opposite way around. They'd figured out the theoretical framework for manipulating space-time, antimatter, and exotic matter, then started building practical applications. They'd essentially turned their entire scientific community into a military research and development program, without most of the scientists realizing that's what they were doing. Sir, Colonel Martinez said. We're receiving a priority communication from the International Defense Station. Put Commander Turner through. Turner's voice came through clearly, though there was background chatter that suggested the IDS was currently operating at maximum alert status. General, we've completed our tactical assessment of the alien fleet. They're definitely military vessels, and they're definitely armed with some impressive technology. Plasma-based weapons, particle beams, and what looks like some form of guided missile system. Our assessment of their capabilities versus ours. Well, sir, that's the interesting part. Their technology is definitely more advanced than ours in some areas. They've got faster than light travel, more efficient energy systems, and their materials science is probably a few decades ahead of ours. But their tactical thinking is about 3 centuries behind ours. Their formation is textbook, their positioning is predictable, and they're operating under the assumption that superior technology automatically equals victory. Turner paused, then added with what sounded like professional admiration. Sir, these guys fight like they've never encountered an opponent that could actually hurt them. And that, in a nutshell, was the Zerithian Collective's problem. They'd spent 300 years conquering species that fell into 2 basic categories: primitive civilizations that couldn't fight back, and advanced civilizations that were too peaceful to fight effectively. They'd never encountered a species that combined advanced technology with a military doctrine based on the assumption that every potential conflict was an existential threat requiring maximum response. Which is exactly what they were about to discover. Chapter 4. Diplomatic Solutions. Admiral Vexthara was beginning to suspect that his career in the Zerithian military was about to come to an abrupt and unpleasant end. His conversation with Dr. Richards had evolved from standard intimidation protocols to what could charitably be described as an impromptu seminar on human technological development. "So you're telling me," Vexthara said slowly, "that your species has been preparing for hostile alien contact for over 50 years? "Oh, longer than that," Dr. Richards replied cheerfully. "I mean, we've been writing science fiction about alien invasions since at least the late 1800s. War of the Worlds, Independence Day, all that stuff. Really got us thinking about defensive strategies. You developed military doctrine based on entertainment?" "Well, entertainment and theoretical analysis. See, we figured that any species capable of interstellar travel would have significant technological advantages over us. So we focused on asymmetric warfare, distributed defense networks, and what we like to call strategic depth." Dr. Richards gestured to something off-screen, and the main display on the Zerithian flagship suddenly showed a tactical overview of the Sol system that was far more detailed than anything Vexithara's own sensors had provided. "This is just the stuff we don't mind you knowing about," Dr. Richards continued conversationally. "We've got monitoring stations throughout the system, automated defense platforms, and response capabilities that we've been testing and refining for decades." Captain Krill Knox leaned over to whisper to the Admiral, "Sir, if they're showing us this voluntarily, what aren't they showing us?" It was a good question. In Vexthara's experience, species that were trying to avoid conflict typically tried to hide their military capabilities, not showcase them. Species that showed off their defenses usually had something even more impressive hidden in reserve. "Dr. Richards," Vexthara said carefully, "are you attempting to negotiate?" "Oh, I'm not qualified to negotiate anything. I'm just a scientist. But I can tell you that we've got people whose entire job is figuring out how to handle first contact scenarios, and they're probably having some very interesting conversations right about now." What Dr. Richards didn't mention was that those very interesting conversations were taking place in approximately 12 different locations around the globe, and they were all reaching roughly the same conclusion. The Zerithian fleet represented either a minor nuisance or a major opportunity, depending on how humanity chose to handle the situation. In Geneva, the United Nations Security Council was in emergency session. In Washington, the president was receiving briefings from advisors who kept using phrases like unprecedented opportunity and strategic advantage. In Moscow, Beijing, London, and half a dozen other capitals, similar conversations were taking place. The consensus was surprisingly uniform. This was humanity's chance to make a very clear statement about Earth's position in galactic politics. Meanwhile, Dr. Elena Vasquez was coordinating what was probably the most complex diplomatic military operation in human history from her command center in Colorado. "Status report," she called out to her team. "The UN is finalizing their official response," her diplomatic liaison reported. "Preliminary draft essentially says, thanks for the introduction, but we're not interested in joining your empire. Military status? All systems remain green. We're tracking the alien fleet continuously, and our response protocols are ready for immediate implementation." Intelligence assessment? Her xenobiology specialist, Dr. James Hoffman, looked up from his analysis. "Based on their communication patterns and tactical positioning, we're dealing with a species that's accustomed to rapid capitulation from technologically inferior opponents. They don't appear to have contingency plans for extended resistance, which means they're probably not prepared for a prolonged engagement. If we can demonstrate sufficient defensive capability, they'll likely withdraw rather than risk significant losses." Dr. Vasquez nodded. It was consistent with their theoretical models for first contact with aggressive alien species. Most expansionist civilizations were fundamentally risk-averse when it came to actual combat. They preferred easy victories over costly campaigns. "What about the diplomatic angle?" she asked. "That's more complicated. We're essentially dealing with a first contact scenario that skipped all the preliminary steps. No gradual revelation of capabilities, no extended negotiation period, no chance to assess their intentions through non-military channels. The problem was that humanity had prepared extensively for alien contact, but they'd assumed they'd have time to evaluate the situation before being forced to make major strategic decisions. Instead, they were being asked to surrender to an unknown alien empire with approximately zero information about the galactic political situation. "Recommendations?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Demonstrate capability without causing unnecessary casualties," Dr. Hoffman said immediately. "Show them that attacking Earth would be costly, but leave them a clear path to withdraw without losing face. And if they don't withdraw, then we transition from demonstration to active defense, with the understanding that we're essentially declaring war on an interstellar empire about which we know almost nothing." It was, as military situations went, less than ideal. Back on the Zorithian flagship, Admiral Vexthara was coming to his own conclusions about the strategic situation, and they weren't particularly encouraging. "Captain Krillnox," he said quietly, "in your professional opinion, what are our chances of successfully completing this mission?" Krillnox consulted his tactical displays with the expression of someone calculating the odds of winning a lottery while being struck by lightning. "Sir, if we're talking about a standard intimidation mission followed by rapid surrender, I'd say our chances are essentially zero. They're not intimidated, and they're definitely not planning to surrender. And if we're talking about actual military engagement, that's more complicated. We have superior technology in several key areas, but they appear to have superior numbers, better tactical positioning, and home field advantage. Plus, they've had decades to prepare for this exact scenario." Vexthara nodded grimly. "And our intelligence about their actual military capabilities?" "Severely limited, sir. We know they have orbital defense platforms, ground-based installations, and some form of system-wide sensor network. But we have no idea what their most advanced systems are capable of." "Recommendations?" "Sir, I recommend we attempt to negotiate a face-saving withdrawal. We came here to add another planet to the collective, not to fight the first major space battle in Zorithian history." It was sound military advice, but Admiral Vexthara had a problem. He was operating under direct orders from the Zorithian High Command, and those orders were very specific about the consequences of returning without achieving the mission objectives. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving another transmission from the planet. This one appears to be from their governmental leadership. Put it through." The display showed a middle-aged human woman wearing what appeared to be formal attire, sitting behind a desk in what was obviously some form of official building. She had the kind of composed, professional demeanor that suggested extensive experience in high-stakes negotiations. "Greetings," she said in accented English. "I am Secretary General Martinez of the United Nations. On behalf of the people of Earth, I want to welcome you to our solar system." Admiral Vexthara found himself automatically straightening his posture. There was something about the human's manner that commanded respect, even across species boundaries. "Secretary General Martinez," he replied formally. "I am Admiral Vexthara of the Zorithian Collective. We are here to discuss your planet's integration into our empire." "I see," Secretary General Martinez said calmly. "I appreciate the directness of your communication. However, I'm afraid I must inform you that Earth is not interested in joining your empire at this time." "At this time?" "Admiral, we're a young species, and we're still learning about our place in the galaxy. We're certainly interested in establishing diplomatic and trade relationships with other civilizations, but we're not prepared to cede our independence to any external authority." Vexthara blinked. In 3 centuries of conquest, he'd never had a species politely decline to surrender, while simultaneously offering to establish diplomatic relations. "Secretary General, I don't think you understand the situation. The Zorithian Collective is offering you the protection and benefits of membership in one of the galaxy's most successful interstellar civilizations. And we appreciate the offer," Martinez replied smoothly. "But we found that independence suits us quite well. We're prepared to defend our autonomy if necessary, though we'd prefer to resolve the situation through diplomatic means." "You're prepared to defend your autonomy against a fleet of 60 military vessels?" Secretary General Martinez smiled with the kind of confidence that suggested she knew something that Admiral Vexthara didn't. "Admiral, we've been preparing for this conversation for a very long time. We're confident in our ability to protect Earth's interests." And that's when Admiral Vexthara made the mistake that would define the rest of his career. "Very well," he said, falling back on standard intimidation protocols. "You have 6 standard hours to reconsider your position. If you do not agree to immediate integration into the collective, we will begin bombardment of your major population centers." Secretary General Martinez's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes that suggested Admiral Vexthara had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I strongly advise you to reconsider that position." "The decision has been made, Secretary General. 6 hours." The communication ended, and Admiral Vexthara found himself staring at a blank screen while trying to figure out why he felt like he'd just made a terrible mistake. "Sir," Captain Krillnox said quietly, "are you sure that was the right approach?" Before Vexthara could answer, every alarm on the bridge started going off simultaneously. Chapter 5. Demonstrations of Capability. What happened next would eventually become required reading at military academies throughout the galaxy, usually filed under strategic miscalculations that redefined interstellar warfare. Within 17 minutes of Admiral Vexthara's ultimatum, The Zerithian fleet detected what their sensors initially classified as massive system-wide mobilization. What that actually meant was that humanity had just activated the most comprehensive defensive network in known galactic history. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Zixtal reported, his voice climbing several octaves. "I'm detecting massive energy spikes throughout the system." "Define massive," Admiral Vexthara said, though he was starting to get that sinking feeling again. "Sir, the energy output from their planetary surface just increased by approximately 3,000%. Their orbital platforms are powering up systems that I didn't even know they had, and—" He paused, checking his readings again. Something is happening in the asteroid belt. On the main display, the tactical view of the Sol system was transforming in real time. What had appeared to be a standard defensive network was revealing itself to be something far more sophisticated. Mining installations throughout the asteroid belt were repositioning themselves into what appeared to be coordinated firing positions. Orbital platforms around Earth were linking together into an integrated network that covered every possible approach vector. And on the planet itself, energy signatures were appearing that suggested the activation of weapons systems that operated on principles the Zerithians didn't entirely understand. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. Multiple transmissions, actually. Put them through." What appeared on screen was a split display showing 4 different humans in what were obviously military command centers. The central figure was a middle-aged man wearing the kind of uniform that suggested significant military authority. "Admiral Vexthara," the man said calmly. "I'm General Webb, United States Strategic Command. I want to make sure you understand the current situation. General Webb, your planet has 6 hours to comply with our demands." "Admiral, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. We're not going to comply with your demands. What we are going to do is demonstrate why attacking Earth is a supremely bad idea." The display shifted to show a tactical overview of the Zerithian fleet's position relative to Earth's defensive network. What Admiral Vexthara saw made his blood temperature drop several degrees. His fleet was surrounded. Not in the traditional sense of being encircled by enemy vessels, but in the much more concerning sense of being positioned within the effective range of approximately 3,000 weapons platforms that had somehow managed to achieve targeting locks on every ship in his fleet simultaneously. "How is this possible?" he muttered. "Sir," Captain Krillnox reported, "our sensors are detecting targeting lasers from everywhere. The orbital platforms, installations on their planetary surface, objects in the asteroid belt, and several locations throughout the outer system that we didn't even know existed." General Webb continued his explanation with the patient tone of someone teaching a particularly slow student. "Admiral, we've been tracking your fleet since you entered our solar system. We've been analyzing your ship configurations, your energy signatures, and your probable tactical capabilities. What you're looking at is a coordinated defensive network that we've been building and testing for 30 years. The tactical display zoomed in to show individual Zerithian vessels, each one highlighted with targeting data that was far more detailed than anything their own sensors could provide. "Your flagship," General Webb said conversationally, "appears to be protected by deflector shields operating on a rotating frequency modulation. Impressive technology. Our analysis suggests that sustained bombardment with alternating particle beams and kinetic projectiles would penetrate your defenses in approximately 43 seconds. Admiral Vexthara's antennae went rigid. That assessment was not only accurate, it was more accurate than his own tactical projections. Your escort frigates have lighter shielding, but superior maneuverability. Our computer models suggest that coordinated attacks using gravity manipulation weapons would be most effective against those vessels." "Gravity manipulation?" Captain Krillnox whispered. "They have gravity manipulation?" "Your heavy cruisers represent the most significant threat to our defensive network," General Webb continued. "However, our analysis indicates that their primary weapons systems have a significant vulnerability to quantum disruption fields." The display showed targeting solutions for every ship in the Zerithian fleet, along with projected engagement times, casualty estimates, and what appeared to be multiple backup attack vectors for each vessel. "Admiral," General Webb said, his tone becoming slightly more serious, "we don't want to fight you. But if you insist on threatening our planet, we're prepared to demonstrate that attacking Earth is considerably more dangerous than your intelligence reports suggested." Admiral Vexthara found himself in the extremely uncomfortable position of commanding a fleet that was apparently outgunned by a species that hadn't even achieved faster-than-light travel. "General Webb," he said carefully, "what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that you take your fleet and leave our solar system. We'll consider this a diplomatic misunderstanding rather than an act of war. Everyone goes home, no one gets hurt, and you get to report to your superiors that Earth is more trouble than it's worth. And if we refuse? The display shifted again, this time showing what appeared to be a demonstration. A small asteroid in the outer system suddenly ceased to exist, replaced by a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated plasma. That was a kinetic strike using one of our mass driver systems, General Webb explained helpfully. Accelerated a tungsten projectile to approximately 15% of light speed. Very clean, very precise, and completely untraceable to any specific installation. He paused to let that sink in. We have several hundred such systems throughout the solar system, along with directed energy weapons, antimatter missiles, and a few experimental systems that I'm not authorized to discuss. Admiral Vexthara was beginning to understand why the galaxy's intelligence networks had been so spectacularly wrong about Earth's military capabilities. They'd been looking for the obvious signs of advanced civilization, massive space fleets, orbital battle stations, planet-killing superweapons. What they'd missed was that humanity had taken a completely different approach to interstellar defense. Instead of building a few incredibly powerful weapons, they'd built thousands of moderately powerful weapons and networked them together into a system that could coordinate attacks across impossible distances with split-second timing. Instead of developing faster-than-light travel first, they'd focused on making their home system into the most heavily defended location in local space. Instead of expanding outward, they'd concentrated their efforts on making sure that anyone who attacked Earth would pay such a high price that the victory would be meaningless. "Sir," his tactical officer reported quietly, "I'm detecting additional energy signatures from their outer system installations. It appears they're charging some form of... Sir, I can't identify the technology, but the energy levels are significant." Admiral Vexthara made the kind of rapid strategic calculation that had kept him alive through 17 military campaigns. The math was simple. His fleet might be able to defeat Earth's defenses, but the cost would be the loss of most of his ships and probably his entire crew. Even if they won, they'd be returning to Zerithian space with a handful of damaged vessels and a report that would probably result in court-martial proceedings for everyone involved. "General Webb," he said slowly, "what assurance do we have that Earth won't use these weapons systems aggressively against other civilizations?" It was a good question, and General Webb appeared to consider it seriously. "Admiral, we're not an expansionist species. We're not interested in conquering other planets or building an interstellar empire. What we are interested in is making sure that no one conquers us. And if other species threaten you, then they'll discover the same thing you're discovering right now. Earth is not defenseless, and we don't surrender." Secretary General Martinez appeared on the display alongside General Webb. "Admiral, we're prepared to offer you safe passage out of our system, along with a formal diplomatic communication for your government. We're interested in establishing peaceful relations with the Zerithian collective, but those relations will be between equals, not between conqueror and conquered." Admiral Vexthara looked around his bridge at officers who were all studiously avoiding eye contact. He looked at tactical displays showing his fleet surrounded by more firepower than most civilizations possessed in their entire military. He looked at the calm, confident faces of the humans who had just politely explained exactly how they would destroy his entire fleet if he forced them to. "Captain Krill Knox," he said quietly, "what's your assessment of our tactical situation?" "Sir, in my professional opinion, we are comprehensively outgunned, outmaneuvered, and outclassed. If we attempt to engage Earth's defenses, we'll lose most of our fleet and accomplish nothing except demonstrating to the galaxy that the Zerithian military is not invincible. And if we withdraw? Then we return to Zerithian space with intelligence about a species that represents either a significant threat or a potential ally, depending on how we handle future diplomatic relations." Admiral Vexthara nodded slowly. It wasn't the outcome he'd been hoping for, but it was better than the alternative. "General Webb, Secretary General Martinez," he said formally, "the Zerithian fleet will withdraw from your system. However, I must inform you that this incident will be reported to our high command, and they may choose to respond differently." "We understand, Admiral," Secretary General Martinez replied. "We'll be ready." And that, as it turned out, was exactly the problem from the Zerithian perspective. Chapter 6: Strategic Implications. The journey back to Zerithian space gave Admiral Vexthara approximately 2 weeks to figure out how to explain to the High Command that his fleet of 60 military vessels had been forced to retreat by a species that didn't even have faster-than-light travel. The official after-action report, when it was finally submitted, would become one of the most widely read documents in Zerithian military history. Not because it was particularly well written, but because it fundamentally challenged every assumption about technological development and military strategy that had guided Zerithian expansion for the past 3 centuries. Subject species humans, Terra Sol 3, the report began. Classification: previously listed as primitive expansion candidate. Current recommendation: advanced defensive civilization, avoid engagement. The report went on to detail humanity's defensive capabilities in the kind of exhaustive technical analysis that suggested Admiral Vexthara had spent most of the return journey trying to figure out exactly how badly the Zerithian intelligence services had miscalculated. Species demonstrates advanced mastery of exotic matter manipulation, quantum field dynamics, and coordinated systems warfare. Defensive network exceeds capabilities of most known civilizations, despite apparent lack of interstellar expansion. Recommend immediate diplomatic contact to establish formal relations. But the most important part of the report was buried in the tactical analysis section. Human defensive doctrine appears based on assumption that any interstellar conflict represents existential threat requiring maximum response. Species has prepared for interstellar warfare without developing interstellar travel. Implications for galactic strategic balance are significant. What Admiral Vexthara had stumbled across was humanity's approach to what military theorists call asymmetric deterrence. Instead of trying to match potential enemies ship for ship, they'd focused on making their home system so dangerous to attack that no rational enemy would attempt it. It was brilliant, terrifying, and completely contrary to every model of technological development the galaxy had seen before. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Dr. Elena Vasquez was coordinating the most comprehensive intelligence analysis in human history. The encounter with the Zerithian fleet had provided humanity with their first real-time data about alien military technology, tactics, and strategic thinking. Initial assessment, she reported to the assembled leadership, is that we're dealing with a galaxy where military technology has advanced along very different lines than our own. The conference room in Geneva contained representatives from every major Earth government, along with military commanders, scientists, and the kind of strategic analysts who spend their careers thinking about scenarios that most people hope never happen. Their faster-than-light technology is considerably more advanced than our theoretical models suggested, Dr. Vasquez continued. Their energy weapons are more efficient than our current systems, and their defensive shielding operates on principles we're still working to understand. But, General Webb prompted, but their tactical doctrine is approximately 300 years out of date by our standards. They fight like a species that's never encountered serious resistance. Fixed formations, predictable attack patterns, and an apparent assumption that superior technology automatically equals victory. What does that tell us about the galaxy at large? Secretary General Martinez asked. Doctor. Hoffman consulted his analysis. It suggests that most interstellar civilizations have followed a similar development pattern. Achieve faster-than-light travel, expand to multiple systems, build large fleets, and overwhelm less advanced species through technological superiority. And the strategic implications? We're dealing with a galaxy full of civilizations that are individually more advanced than us, but none of them have apparently encountered a species that focuses on defensive rather than expansionist strategies. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a tactical display showing the galactic region surrounding Earth. Based on our analysis of Zerithian technology and strategic thinking, we can extrapolate probable capabilities for other interstellar civilizations. The good news is that our defensive network would be effective against most conventional attack strategies. And the bad news? The bad news is that we're now visible to the galactic community. Every major civilization in local space is going to know that Earth exists, that we're technologically advanced, and that we forced a Zerithian fleet to retreat. Secretary General Martinez leaned back in her chair. So we've essentially announced our presence to the galaxy by refusing to surrender to the first aliens who showed up. That's an accurate summary, yes. Recommendations? General Webb spoke up. From a military perspective, we need to accelerate our defensive preparations. The Zerithians were apparently a minor power compared to some of the galactic civilizations. If someone decides that Earth represents a threat rather than just a stubborn primitive world, we need to be ready. What about diplomatic options? Martinez asked. Dr. Vasquez consulted her datapad. We've prepared preliminary diplomatic packages for transmission to major galactic civilizations. Essentially, we're announcing our presence as an independent world interested in peaceful relations but prepared to defend our autonomy. And if that doesn't work, then we find out whether our defensive preparations are adequate against enemies who are expecting serious resistance. It was, as strategic situations went, less than ideal. But it was also, in a strange way, exactly what humanity had been preparing for. 6 months later, the galactic intelligence networks were buzzing with reports about the mysterious species that had forced a Zerithian fleet to retreat. The reports were contradictory, often inaccurate, and universally concerning. In the Andromedan Council chambers, Ambassador Keltar was presenting his analysis to the assembled representatives. The species appears to have developed advanced defensive technologies without achieving interstellar expansion. This is unprecedented. How unprecedented? Council Leader Vexani asked. There is no record in galactic history of a single-world civilization successfully resisting Zerithian intimidation tactics. The implications were clear to everyone in the chamber. If a primitive single-world species could force the Zerithians to retreat, what did that say about the effectiveness of traditional expansion strategies? What do we know about their actual capabilities? Another representative asked. Very little. The Zerithian report suggests advanced mastery of exotic physics, but the technical details are concerning. They appear to have weaponized their entire solar system. Weaponized how? Mining installations that can function as kinetic weapons platforms. Power generation systems that can be reconfigured as directed energy weapons. A communication network that doubles as a targeting and coordination system. Ambassador Keltar paused, then added, They've essentially turned their home system into a fortress that can coordinate attacks across interplanetary distances with apparently unlimited ammunition supplies. The chamber went quiet as the assembled representatives considered the strategic implications. What's their apparent expansion pattern? Council Leader Vexani asked. That's the most concerning part. They don't appear to have one. All available intelligence suggests they're focused entirely on defending their home system rather than expanding outward. Which means they represent either a significant defensive threat that will discourage expansion in their region of space, or a potential ally for any civilization that can establish peaceful relations with them. In the hegemony war rooms, similar conversations were taking place. In the collective planning chambers, strategic analysts were revising their expansion models. Throughout the galaxy, military planners were asking the same basic question. How do you conquer a species that spent decades preparing for the specific scenario of being conquered? The answer, as it turned out, was that you don't. You either find a way to coexist with them, or you find somewhere else to expand. Chapter 7. Galactic Politics. 9 months after the Zerithian incident, Earth was receiving approximately 47 different types of alien communication on any given day. Most of them fell into 3 basic categories: diplomatic inquiries, trade proposals, and what could generously be described as scientific curiosity. Dr. Richards, who had somehow become humanity's unofficial first contact specialist, was having the time of his life. Today's lineup, he announced to the assembled diplomatic team, includes a formal greeting from something called the Centauri Commerce Guild, a scientific exchange proposal from the Andromedan Council, and what appears to be a religious inquiry from a species that wants to know if we're the fulfillment of some kind of prophecy. Secretary General Martinez rubbed her temples. The prophecy thing again? Apparently there's a widespread galactic legend about a species that would emerge from a single world and bring balance to the cosmic order or something like that. Several civilizations think we might be it. And our response? Standard diplomatic language. We're flattered by their interest. We're not claiming to be anyone's prophesied saviors, and we're interested in peaceful relations with all civilizations. The thing about becoming visible to galactic civilization was that it came with a learning curve that nobody had quite anticipated. Earth's diplomatic corps was working around the clock to establish protocols for interacting with dozens of different species, each with their own cultural expectations, communication methods, and political systems. Some of the aliens were easy to deal with. The Centauri Commerce Guild, for example, operated on principles that translated well: mutual benefit, clearly defined agreements, and a healthy respect for profit margins. Earth's economists were having productive discussions about trade relationships that could provide humanity with advanced technology in exchange for, well, they were still working out what Earth had to offer that other civilizations might want. Others were more complicated. The Andromedan Council was a democratic federation of over 200 species, and their decision-making process made the United Nations look streamlined by comparison. Establishing formal diplomatic relations required navigating a bureaucratic system that spanned multiple star systems and operated on principles that occasionally seemed to violate basic logic. And then there were the hegemony inquiries, which were polite, formal, and subtly terrifying. What exactly does the hegemony want? Martinez asked. Dr. Hoffman consulted his analysis. Near as we can tell, they're conducting what amounts to a strategic assessment. They want to know our military capabilities, our expansion plans, and our long-term objectives in the region. And our response? We've been honest. We're not planning to expand beyond our solar system anytime soon. We're not interested in military alliances against other civilizations, and our primary objective is maintaining our independence. How are they taking that? Surprisingly well, actually. Apparently most of the galaxy operates on the assumption that any sufficiently advanced civilization will eventually become expansionist. The fact that we're explicitly choosing not to expand is novel. Dr. Elena Vasquez looked up from her intelligence reports. There's something else we need to discuss. We're getting indications that our little demonstration with the Zorithians has had some unintended consequences. Such as? Several minor civilizations in our region of space have apparently decided that if humans can force the Zorithians to retreat, maybe they don't have to automatically surrender to every major power that shows up demanding tribute. Secretary General Martinez blinked. Are you telling me that we accidentally started some kind of galactic independence movement? It's more complicated than that, but yes, essentially. We're receiving communication requests from dozens of single-world civilizations asking for advice on defensive strategies. And our response? We're sharing general principles while being very careful not to provide specific technical details. We're not trying to arm the galaxy, but we're also not discouraging other species from developing their own defensive capabilities. The truth was that humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage had created what strategists were calling a demonstration effect. For centuries, the galaxy's minor civilizations had operated under the assumption that resistance to major powers was futile. Earth's successful defense against Zorithian intimidation had challenged that assumption. Now, across local space, smaller civilizations were asking themselves, if these humans can do it, why can't we? It was exactly the kind of question that made major galactic powers nervous. There's something else, Dr. Vasquez continued. We're getting reports that several major civilizations are reassessing their expansion strategies in this region of space. Meaning? Meaning that nobody wants to be the next major power that gets embarrassed by attacking a primitive civilization and discovering that they're not primitive at all. General Webb leaned forward. Are we talking about a regional power vacuum? More like a regional stalemate. The major powers are being more cautious about expansion, the minor powers are being more resistant to intimidation, and everyone's trying to figure out where humans fit into the overall strategic picture. It was, Martinez realized, exactly the kind of complex political situation that nobody had planned for. Earth's defensive strategy had been based on the assumption that they'd either successfully deter attacks or fight them off. They hadn't really considered the possibility that their mere existence would destabilize galactic politics in their region of space. Options? She asked. Option 1. We keep our heads down, avoid getting involved in galactic politics, and hope that everyone leaves us alone. Likelihood of success? Minimal. We're already involved whether we want to be or not. Every major power in the region is making strategic decisions based on our presumed capabilities. Option 2? We accept that we're now a major player in regional politics and start acting like it. Formal diplomatic relations, mutual defense agreements with smaller civilizations, active participation in galactic governance structures. And Option 3? Dr. Vasquez smiled grimly. Option 3 is that we find a middle path. We maintain our independence, we avoid formal military alliances, but we make it clear that we're interested in maintaining regional stability. Elaborate. We become the galaxy's neutral party. The civilization that other species can turn to for mediation, conflict resolution, and honest brokerage. We're not threatening anyone's territory, we're not trying to build an empire, but we're sufficiently powerful that our opinions carry weight. Secretary General Martinez considered this. And if someone decides to test our commitment to neutrality? Then we demonstrate why attacking neutral parties is a bad idea for everyone involved. It was an interesting concept, Earth as the galaxy's Switzerland, but with enough firepower to make neutrality a credible position, rather than just an aspiration. What about the long-term implications? Martinez asked. General Webb spoke up. From a strategic perspective, it's probably our best option. We avoid the costs and risks of imperial expansion while maintaining enough influence to protect our interests. Plus, it gives us time to continue developing our technology without having to worry about immediate external threats. And from a diplomatic perspective, Dr. Hoffman consulted his cultural analysis. Most galactic civilizations appear to respect the concept of powerful neutrals. It's a recognized position in interstellar politics, though it's usually held by ancient civilizations with overwhelming technological advantages. Are we talking about a sustainable long-term strategy? That depends on whether we can maintain our technological edge and our strategic independence. As long as we remain too dangerous to attack and too useful to alienate, neutrality should be viable. Secretary General Martinez nodded slowly. It wasn't the future that humanity had planned for, but it was better than most of the alternatives. Draft a proposal, she said. Formal policy of armed neutrality, with emphasis on regional stability and conflict mediation. We'll present it to the various galactic powers as our official position. And if they don't accept it, then we'll demonstrate why accepting it is in everyone's best interests. Chapter 8. The New Equilibrium. 18 months after first contact, Admiral Vexthara found himself in the deeply ironic position of serving as the Zerithian Collective's unofficial liaison to Earth. His career, which he'd assumed was over after the failed conquest mission, had instead taken an unexpected turn when the High Command realized that he was the only Zerithian officer with direct experience in human negotiations. Admiral, Secretary General Martinez said via the secure communication link that now connected Earth to several dozen galactic civilizations. We've received your request for mediation in the Rigel border dispute. Vexthara's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement. Secretary General, the Collective finds itself in the unusual position of preferring diplomatic resolution over military action. And why is that unusual? Because 12 months ago, our standard response to border disputes was to send a fleet and demand compliance. However, recent events have influenced our strategic thinking. It was a delicate way of saying that Earth's demonstration of defensive capability had convinced the Zerithian High Command that military solutions were becoming increasingly expensive and unpredictable. What exactly is the nature of the dispute? Martinez asked. The hegemony claims territorial rights to the Rigel system based on ancient conquest. We claim the same territory based on more recent settlement. The local inhabitants prefer independence. Previous negotiations have stalled because none of the parties trust the others to honor any agreement. And you think Earth can provide effective mediation? Secretary General, in the past year, humans have successfully mediated 7 different territorial disputes, 3 trade disagreements, and 1 conflict that we're still not entirely sure how to classify. Your species appears to have a talent for finding solutions that nobody else had considered. Martinez smiled slightly. We have experience with complex political situations. What Admiral Vexthara didn't mention was that Earth's mediation successes were based on a simple but effective principle. It's easier to negotiate with someone when you know they can destroy your entire fleet if the negotiations fail. Earth's position as a neutral mediator was uniquely credible, because they were demonstrably powerful enough to enforce their decisions, but apparently uninterested in using that power for territorial expansion. It was the kind of combination that made other civilizations take their diplomatic suggestions very seriously. We'll review the details and provide our assessment within the standard timeframe, Martinez said. However, I should mention that any mediation agreement will include our standard enforcement provisions, which are: all parties agree to abide by the mediated settlement. Any party that violates the agreement will find itself explaining that decision to us personally. Admiral Vexthara's mandibles clicked in what humans had learned to recognize as Zerithian amusement. Secretary General, the Collective accepts those terms. Meanwhile, in the asteroid belt, Commander Turner was overseeing the expansion of humanity's defensive network. What had started as a system designed to repel alien invasion had evolved into something more sophisticated. A platform for projecting power throughout local space without actually leaving the solar system. Status report, he called out to his engineering team. The new sensor arrays are online, Chief Engineer David Kim reported. We've got full coverage out to approximately 50 light-years, with detailed tracking capability for any object larger than a shuttle. Communication relays? Operational. We can maintain real-time contact with any civilization within 30 light-years, and store and forward messaging out to about 100 light-years. Defensive capabilities? All systems remain green. We're currently tracking 17 different alien fleets in our region of space, none of which appear to pose any immediate threat. Commander Turner nodded. The expansion of Earth's monitoring network had been one of the unexpected benefits of humanity's new diplomatic role. Other civilizations were actually volunteering to help humanity establish sensor stations throughout local space, partly because it improved everyone's ability to track potential threats, and partly because it demonstrated trust in Earth's neutrality. Sir, his communications officer called out. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Andromedan Council. They're requesting immediate mediation assistance. What's the situation? Apparently, there's been some kind of incident between 2 of their member species. Details are classified, but they're using words like potential war crimes and interstellar incident. Commander Turner sighed. Patch them through to Geneva, and notify the Rapid Response Team that we might need to deploy diplomatic assets on short notice. The Rapid Response Team was humanity's solution to the problem of mediating disputes between civilizations that were scattered across dozens of star systems. Since humans still couldn't travel faster than light, they'd developed an alternative. A network of pre-positioned diplomatic stations throughout local space, staffed by human negotiators and equipped with enough defensive firepower to ensure that the negotiations remained civil. It was an expensive system, but it was also effective. When two civilizations were on the verge of war, the knowledge that human mediators were already in position and capable of immediate intervention had a remarkably calming effect on everyone involved. Dr. Elena Vasquez was coordinating the diplomatic response from her command center, which had evolved from a defensive coordination facility into something resembling the United Nations, if the United Nations had been run by people who really understood military strategy. "Situation report," she called out. Two Andromedan member species got into what appears to be a shooting match over mining rights in a disputed system, her intelligence analyst reported. 3 ships destroyed, approximately 40 casualties, and both sides are claiming the other fired first. Evidence? Contradictory. Both sides have sensor logs that support their version of events, but the logs are inconsistent with each other. Third-party verification? That's where it gets interesting. We've got sensor data from our monitoring stations that show the actual sequence of events, but releasing that information would reveal the full extent of our surveillance capabilities. Dr. Vasquez considered this. Earth's sensor network was far more comprehensive than most galactic civilizations realized, and there were strategic advantages to keeping it that way. Options? Option 1. We release the sensor data and resolve the dispute definitively, but everyone in the galaxy learns exactly how much we can see. Option 2. We mediate based on the available evidence and try to reach a settlement that both parties can accept without revealing our additional information. And Option 3. We find a creative solution that resolves the dispute without setting precedents that we'll regret later. Vasquez smiled. Option 3 it is. Get me a secure connection to both Andromedan factions, and prepare a mediation proposal based on shared responsibility and compensation rather than blame assignment. What Dr. Vasquez had learned over the past year was that most interstellar disputes weren't really about the specific issues that triggered them. They were about status, respect, and the fear of being seen as weak by other galactic powers. If you could address those underlying concerns, the specific trigger issues usually became much easier to resolve. Dr. Vasquez, her communications officer called out, we're also receiving requests for mediation assistance from the Centauri Commerce Guild, something called the Vegan Free Trade Alliance, and a species that apparently doesn't have a name but wants help with territorial negotiations. Schedule them, she replied, and make sure we have sufficient diplomatic assets available for simultaneous deployments. The thing about becoming the galaxy's primary mediator was that success bred more demand for services. Every successfully resolved dispute led to referrals from other civilizations facing similar problems. Within a year, Earth had gone from being an unknown primitive world to being the first choice for interstellar conflict resolution throughout local space. It was, Secretary General Martinez reflected, exactly the kind of problem that she'd never imagined having to solve. Epilogue. 18 months later, Admiral Vex Thara stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Diplomatic Station 1, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath him. The station was a joint project between humanity and the Andromedan Council, designed to facilitate face-to-face negotiations between species that required different atmospheric conditions. Admiral, Dr. Richards said, joining him at the viewport. I have to ask, do you ever regret not conquering us when you had the chance? Vex Thara's mandibles clicked in amusement. Dr. Richards, I've come to realize that conquering your species would have been the worst strategic mistake in Zerithian history. How so? We would have gained one heavily defended world and made enemies of every other civilization in local space. Instead, by failing to conquer you, we've gained access to the most effective diplomatic network in the galaxy and significantly improved our regional security situation. Dr. Richards grinned. So you're saying that losing to us was actually winning? I'm saying that humans have a talent for turning military confrontations into diplomatic opportunities. It's unusual. Below them, Earth continued its rotation, its surface dotted with the lights of cities and the occasional flare of spacecraft launching toward the outer system. The planet looked peaceful, almost pastoral, from orbital distance. What couldn't be seen from orbit was the vast network of defensive installations, sensor arrays, and communication systems that now extended throughout the solar system and beyond. Earth had become the center of a regional security network that spanned dozens of star systems and included formal mutual defense agreements with over 30 different civilizations. Humanity had achieved something that no other species in galactic history had managed. They'd become a major power without conquering anyone. Dr. Richards, Admiral Vexthara said thoughtfully, what do you think will happen when your species finally develops faster than light travel? Dr. Richards considered this question while watching a cargo shuttle dock with one of the orbital freight platforms. That's an interesting question, Admiral. We've been debating it ourselves. And your conclusion? We think we'll probably build more defensive networks around other star systems. Maybe establish some research stations, some diplomatic outposts. But we're not really interested in the whole galactic empire thing. Why not? Dr. Richards shrugged. Empires are expensive. They require constant military action to maintain, and they have a tendency to collapse spectacularly when someone figures out how to resist them effectively. He paused, then added with a grin. Plus, we've discovered that it's much more profitable to be the galaxy's Switzerland than to be the galaxy's Rome. Admiral Vexthara pondered this while watching another human cargo vessel maneuver toward the station. The vessel was sleek, efficient, and, according to his tactical analysis, capable of accelerating to approximately 30% of light speed if necessary. Not because it was a warship, but because humanity had apparently decided that all of their spacecraft should be capable of emergency combat maneuvers. Admiral, Dr. Richards said, there's something I've been curious about. What's the galactic consensus on humanity these days? The consensus, Vexthara replied carefully, is that your species represents a new model for interstellar civilization. Most powers are interested in maintaining positive relations with Earth, and the ones that aren't interested are discovering that attacking human allies tends to result in very polite diplomatic communications, followed by the sudden appearance of human defensive assets in their territory. Dr. Richards chuckled. We've gotten pretty good at the whole speak softly and carry a big stick approach. Dr. Richards, may I ask you a personal question? Sure. When your species first detected our fleet approaching your system, were you afraid? Dr. Richards considered this seriously. Some of us were, certainly, but mostly we were excited. We'd been waiting for this moment for decades. Waiting for alien invasion? Waiting for confirmation that we weren't alone in the universe. The possibility that you might be hostile was just one of many scenarios we'd prepared for. Admiral Vexthara's antennae twitched thoughtfully. And now that you know you're not alone? Now we're looking forward to finding out what else is out there. The galaxy's a big place, and we've barely started exploring it. Through the viewport, they could see the running lights of dozens of spacecraft moving between Earth and the various orbital installations. Some were human vessels, but others belonged to the growing number of alien civilizations that had established permanent diplomatic and trade missions in the Sol system. Dr. Richards, Admiral Vexthara said, I believe your species may have accidentally solved one of the galaxy's oldest problems. Which problem is that? The assumption that interstellar civilization requires imperial expansion. You've demonstrated that it's possible to be a major power without conquering anyone. Is that really such a novel concept? Dr. Richards, in 3,000 years of galactic history, every major civilization has been built on territorial expansion and resource extraction from conquered worlds. The idea that a species could achieve galactic influence through defensive capability and diplomatic mediation is unprecedented. Dr. Richards looked thoughtful. Well, when you put it that way, I guess we have been doing things a little differently. A little differently, Admiral Vexthara repeated, with what might have been amusement. Dr. Richards, your species has fundamentally altered the strategic balance of local space in less than 2 years. Several major powers have restructured their entire expansion strategies because of the human precedent. The human precedent? The demonstration that defensive technology can be more cost-effective than offensive capability. That regional influence can be achieved through mediation rather than conquest. And that military deterrence can be based on the threat of defensive action rather than offensive retaliation. Through the station's communication systems, they could hear the chatter of ongoing diplomatic negotiations. The Andromedan Council was working out a new trade agreement with the Centauri Commerce Guild. The Zerithian Collective was coordinating a joint scientific expedition with 3 smaller civilizations. The hegemony was actually requesting human mediation for an internal political dispute. Admiral, Dr. Richards said. Do you think this is sustainable, this whole regional stability thing we've got going? Dr. Richards, for the first time in galactic history, we have a region of space where major powers are competing through diplomatic and economic means, rather than military conquest. It's not just sustainable, it's revolutionary. And if someone decides to test it? Admiral Vexthara's mandibles clicked in what humans had learned was the Zerithian equivalent of a confident smile. Then they'll discover why the rest of us are very, very committed to maintaining the current system. 2 years later, the first annual Interstellar Diplomacy Conference convened aboard Diplomatic Station 2, a massive facility constructed jointly by 17 different civilizations in orbit around Mars. The conference was designed to address long-term strategic cooperation, trade standardization, and what the organizing committee diplomatically referred to as conflict prevention protocols. Secretary General Martinez, now bearing the additional title of Chief Mediator for Regional Space, delivered the opening address to representatives from over 40 different civilizations. 3 years ago, she began, humanity made first contact with galactic civilization under circumstances that could have led to interstellar war. Instead, through a combination of defensive preparedness and diplomatic creativity, we've built a regional network that has prevented 7 potential conflicts, facilitated hundreds of billions of credits in interstellar trade, and established the foundations for long-term galactic cooperation. The assembled representatives, a mixture of species that would have seemed like science fiction just a few years earlier, listened with the kind of attention usually reserved for matters of life and death, which, Martinez reflected, this essentially was. The system we've built isn't perfect, she continued. It requires constant maintenance, continuous negotiation, and the ongoing commitment of every participating civilization. But it's also demonstrated that interstellar relations don't have to be based on conquest and submission. She paused, looking around the assembly at species that, in many cases, had been enemies for centuries before humanity had arrived to complicate their strategic calculations. We propose to expand this model. Not through human leadership. We're not interested in running a galactic empire, but through collective commitment to the principles that have made regional stability possible. The response was immediate and positive, though Admiral Vexthara noted with professional interest that several of the more militaristic species were taking extensive notes about Earth's defensive capabilities. Old habits apparently died hard, but the fact that they were taking notes at a diplomatic conference rather than planning invasion fleets suggested that humanity's approach was working exactly as intended. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now Director of Interstellar Strategic Affairs, was coordinating the implementation of what historians would eventually call the Sol Accords, a framework for interstellar cooperation based on mutual defense, economic interdependence, and binding arbitration for disputes. Status report, she called out to her expanded team, which now included alien specialists in everything from interstellar law to exotic physics. 43 civilizations have signed preliminary agreements, her diplomatic coordinator reported. 15 major powers have committed to the mutual defense provisions, and we're seeing significant progress on trade standardization. Military coordination? All participating civilizations have agreed to share threat assessment data through the human-administered network. We're tracking potential security issues across approximately 200 light-years of space. And the holdouts? 3 major powers are still evaluating the agreements. They're not hostile, but they're taking a wait-and-see approach. Dr. Vasquez nodded. It was better than they'd hoped for when the whole process had started. Dr. Vasquez, her intelligence analyst called out. We're receiving reports of some kind of situation in the Outer Rim territories. Something about a species that's been attacking shipping lanes and refusing diplomatic contact. Details? Limited information, but it appears to be a previously unknown civilization with advanced military technology and aggressive expansion policies. Several of our partner civilizations are requesting consultation on response strategies. Dr. Vasquez smiled grimly. Well, I suppose it was inevitable that someone would test the system eventually. Orders? Convene an emergency session of the Security Coordination Council. Let's see if our collective defense agreements work as well in practice as they do on paper. What Dr. Vasquez didn't mention was that humanity had been preparing for exactly this scenario for the past 18 months. The emergence of a new aggressive power would be the ultimate test of whether their diplomatic network could coordinate an effective military response. If it worked, the Sol Accords would become the foundation for long-term galactic stability. If it didn't, humanity would discover whether their defensive preparations were adequate against enemies who had learned from the Zerithian experience. Either way, it was going to be interesting. 3 days later, Admiral Vexthara found himself commanding a joint task force of 47 vessels from 12 different civilizations, all operating under human strategic coordination. It was, he reflected, probably the most multinational military operation in galactic history. "Admiral," came the voice of Captain Chen from the human command vessel. "We're receiving telemetry from the advanced scouts. The hostile forces appear to be using some form of phasing technology that makes conventional targeting difficult." "Phasing technology?" Vexthara asked. "They can apparently shift partially out of normal space-time, making them difficult to detect and nearly impossible to hit with conventional weapons." "And the human assessment?" Dr. Vasquez thinks it's probably a variation on dimensional manipulation technology. "Theoretical principles are well understood, but most civilizations consider it too dangerous to weaponize." Admiral Vexthara's mandibles clicked with what might have been anticipation. "Captain Chen, do humans consider it too dangerous to weaponize?" "Sir, we've been working on countermeasures for dimensional manipulation since we first encountered the theoretical framework. We're not sure if they'll work, but we're prepared to test them. And if the countermeasures fail? Then we fall back to Plan B, which is asymmetric warfare using the same principles that convinced you guys to leave our solar system alone." Admiral Vexthara found himself looking forward to seeing how humanity handled an enemy that couldn't be deterred through conventional intimidation. It was, he realized, going to be very educational. The battle, when it finally came, lasted approximately 17 minutes. The hostile forces, which had been terrorizing shipping lanes for months with apparent impunity, discovered that humanity's approach to dimensional manipulation countermeasures was characteristically direct. If you can't target enemies that are partially phased out of normal space-time, you simply attack all of space-time simultaneously. The technical details were classified, but the results were clear. The hostile fleet found itself unable to phase, unable to maneuver effectively, and facing coordinated attacks from a joint task force that had spent weeks training for exactly this scenario. When the surviving enemy vessels requested diplomatic contact to negotiate surrender terms, they were connected directly to Secretary General Martinez, who explained the situation with the kind of calm professionalism that suggested this had been just another routine diplomatic exercise. "The Soul Accords provide for the protection of interstellar commerce and the peaceful resolution of territorial disputes," she told the enemy commander. "Your forces have been interfering with both objectives." We were not aware of these accords," the enemy commander replied. "That's understandable. They're relatively new. However, they now apply to this region of space, which means that future attacks on civilian shipping will be considered acts of war against 43 different civilizations. And our options? Join the Accords as a participating civilization, relocate your expansion efforts to unprotected regions of space, or continue your current activities and discover why the previous option is inadvisable." The enemy commander, after consulting with their government, chose option 1. Within 6 months, they had become productive members of the regional security network. 10 years later, Dr. Richards, now considerably older and bearing the title of Director Emeritus of Xenological Studies, stood in the observation lounge of Diplomatic Station 7, watching the construction of humanity's first faster-than-light research vessel. The ship was a joint project between Earth and 17 partner civilizations, designed to explore regions of space beyond the current diplomatic network. Its mission was scientific rather than military, but it carried enough defensive capability to protect itself against most conceivable threats. "Dr. Richards," Admiral Vexthara said, joining him at the viewport. "Are you nervous about humanity's first interstellar voyage?" "Not nervous, exactly," Richards replied. "Excited, maybe. Curious about what we'll find out there. And if you encounter hostile civilizations?" Richards grinned with the expression of someone who had spent 10 years watching humanity solve increasingly complex galactic problems. "Admiral, we've got 43 allied civilizations, the most advanced defensive network in known space, and a diplomatic corps that successfully prevented interstellar war for a decade." He paused, watching the research vessel as construction crews put the finishing touches on its exotic matter drive systems. "If we encounter hostile civilizations, we'll do what we always do. We'll try to talk to them first, and if that doesn't work, we'll show them why being hostile is more trouble than it's worth." Admiral Vexthara's mandibles clicked with amusement. "Dr. Richards, I believe your species has turned diplomacy into a form of warfare. Or maybe we've turned warfare into a form of diplomacy. Either way, it seems to be working." Through the viewport, they could see dozens of vessels from different civilizations moving through local space, all protected by the network of treaties, mutual defense agreements, and diplomatic protocols that had grown out of humanity's first encounter with galactic civilization. It wasn't the future that anyone had expected when Admiral Vexthara's fleet had first arrived at Earth with demands for surrender. But it was, everyone agreed, considerably better than the alternatives. The end.